Started tonight. We are going to be looking at the 10th commandment. I don't have any ambitions of getting past the 10th commandment because it's an interesting one to talk about, discuss, and then also see the implications of it as we move forward into the New Testament and also throughout the entirety of the Old Testament as well. So as is our custom, we're going to read through the entirety of the 10 commandments, verses 1 through 17. And so if somebody would be willing to read for us verses 1 through 6, and then somebody else pick up in 7 through 11, and then someone else in 12 through 17, that would be awesome. So who wants to go first? Okay, awesome. Thanks, Ray.
And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the waters under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and shewing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments.
Okay. Someone else pick up in 7 through 11.
You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the earth, and made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
All right, and somebody finishes out with 12 through 17.
Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Okay, awesome. So as we approach, again, the finality of the 10th commandment, only to then turn around and go through the entire book of the covenant, which is more laws and more stipulations. We find ourselves looking down the barrel of the thou shalt not covet command, which is, it really is a joy to study. It is a joy to try to apply, and it is really fun to kind of talk through. So I want us to do that tonight. So first we're going to start out like we normally do. What is your understanding historically of this command? How have you traditionally understood it? What have you been taught? All of those things. Let's bat that around for a second.
For me, like covetousness, jealousy, and envy have all been kind of used like interchangeably. There's never been like a whole lot of clear, like, what's the difference between them? They might be the same. I'm just saying, like, it's always been presented to me in my experience. It's always kind of, they've been all really closely related, almost the same thing. So coveting would just be kind of like being jealous or envious of your neighbor's thing.
Okay. All right.
Like what we tell Lucy is, you can want one like theirs, but don't want theirs.
Okay.
It's kind of how I try to break down her terms.
Yeah, no, that's good. Acknowledge something that you like, whether it's a pretty bike or whatever, you can acknowledge that. But the desiring of it is that which this command is prohibiting. Absolutely. Anybody else?
I feel like especially as a kid, it was just kind of that, especially with my parents, it was just that you get what you get and you don't get your fit kind of attitude.
Okay, yeah.
Like,
I like that. What's that? You get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. Okay,
That
gotcha.
is her mom talking.
Okay.
that is Lucy.
She always talking in rhymes? That's cool.
No, it's just that thing when I was a kid. But just like that attitude of like, you got what God gave you. You don't fit.
Right, yeah. No, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and all those things are absolutely right. And so as we kind of go through this study of the 10th commandment, is how we apply it to what's going on in the Old Testament and then some things in the New. We need to keep these I think, historical memories of what we have been taught and how we have traditionally understood it in mind as we go through it, because I don't think they've been informed by something, and hopefully this study will just inform them more, that we have a better grasp on it, that we can apply it better, that we can also understand it in the context of all of Scripture, and what are the dangers concerning it. And also, I want to, at the end of this whole thing, for us to have a remedy for it. What is the remedy for covetousness? That type of deal. So you shall not covet. Let's go ahead and go through the text, and then we're going to kind of get into some of the teaching on it as we kind of dive a little bit deeper. So you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay, so we start out with house, right, which is eerily similar to even some of the language that's used in the first part of chapter 20, and that the Lord brought up Israel out of the house of the land of Egypt. There's some interesting correlations there that people would argue form this kind of beginning and end of a unit by the use of similar language and the use of similar words. I'll leave that to you as to whether or not you would ascribe to that or not. It's not really that important to the meaning of the text. It's just a matter of marking boundaries of what are the 10 words of God. This is essentially what people are trying to get at. So you shall not covet your neighbor's house. Again, not only the house, but presumably everything within the domicile, right? Within the house, right? So if they have amazing lawn chair, or back then like a putty chair or something like that, that they have like built up in their house, probably not a good idea to desire that from them, leading to an action. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Now, this obviously seems self-explanatory, and I would argue that it is. However, this does not give women an off-the-hook type attitude either. It doesn't mean that only men have this applied to them. And so I want us to be careful that this is speaking to a male, yes, but it is applicable to both genders. So ladies, it's not a good idea to covet another person's husband. So again, as we go through this, you can apply that as you will. Or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay, so it seems like we've got a pretty good handle on what the text is saying. What I want to do is kind of dive into where we see it elsewhere in the Old Testament to try to get a grasp on what is it actually prohibiting. Because there's some interesting correlations or interesting contrast that we can draw between this command and many others that precede it. So first off, there is no counterpart, like we've been talking about in other law codes around the ancient Near East. There are a plethora that we could pull from that also have prohibitions against murder, that also have prohibitions against adultery or against stealing. There is no counterpart to this one in any other ancient Near Eastern law code that we have found. This is uniquely Israel, which is very interesting because it seems as though the intent of the command is a little bit deeper than actual tangible actions. It seems like it's going a little bit more to the heart, right? Would you guys agree with that, disagree with that?
Yeah, Pastor, I would, as looking at it and taking a hard look without the sexual nature in there, I would put covet in the word covet in the same kind of category as lust. So,
yeah, so exactly like Jim was talking about, those jealousy, envy, covet, lust, all those things have to do, you're exactly right, Buck, the idea that they happen internally, right? They're not external to the body. Like stealing, you definitely know that you have stolen something, right? Because it is no longer in the possession of the other person. Mm-hmm. Adultery, right? That you definitely know when that happens, right? You definitely know when murder takes place, right? Because one person is left not living anymore. But this one, and this gets to our next topic of discussion, if I can get there, is do not desire what you do not have is kind of a basic definition that I'm going to put out there that we're going to fine tune throughout it as we go throughout this particular study.
Yeah, if I may, Pastor, I think
Yeah, go for
I
it.
think that desire is a too soft a word, because it's not that hard to work for something that you desire, but when you look at somebody else's stuff and when you covet it, it's like looking at someone else's wife and wishing that you had her, in the biblical sense.
Right, absolutely. And so the only reason I use desire there is to communicate the internal nature of it.
Okay.
And so I'm not disagreeing with you. It's just trying to find a different word that we may connect with that we can then build upon. Because we're going to fine tune again this definition as we go throughout the study of this command. So, but yes, absolutely, you're absolutely right. So the word here, if you're interested in those types of things, the Hebrew word is command, and so it has a context-driven understanding of desire, or obviously covet after is the way that we translate it. It's often followed by an action verb, which is extremely interesting. Most of the time that you have command appear in the Old Testament, an action verb quickly follows it. What do I mean by action verb? What would we think would make sense?
They're internalizing some feeling and then they carry out an action, and that's probably motivated by that feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you have most of the time in the Old Testament, we'll look at a couple of cases where this is true. But you have hamad, which means desire something. And then immediately in the next clause, you have they did something. They took this, they seized this, they lay with her, they knew her.
Would it be like when Eve, like in Genesis 3, is it the same word there? Like when she saw, like, I don't know if it says desire there or not, but
normally
yeah.
and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes, but yeah, normally those words are translated as desire.
Mm-hmm.
So when it describes fruit in the garden, it says that God made it desirous. Mm-hmm. So this word is used to humanity, or to Adam and Eve, and then right before she takes of it, it uses two words for this idea of desire. The second one is our word here in the command, that it was pleasing to the eye. That's the first one. And then she desired it for food, or for it to make her wise. And I think it's chapter 2. We'll look at it, chapter 2 chapter 3 verse 9 or something like that. We'll look at it when we get there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That is our verb. But like I said, normally this occurs and it coincides with an action verb that follows it. Now, why is that? Why do you think that's the case? And this kind of gets at the understanding of how this command is a little bit different than all the other ones. How is this command set apart or different than the ones that have come previously? And we've already been touching on it. I'm not trying to trick you.
I think it was because, like, I was kind of covetousness is something that leads to some action, even if it's not like taking what you're coveting. It's, it leads to being discontent, or like when a little kid really wants another little kid's toy and then suddenly they're like breaking their toys,
Right.
It's like it leads to some action,
Mhm.
even if it's not the obvious action of taking what it is they're coveting. And so, like, it's more than just like what Buck was saying, more than just, ooh, I want that.
Mhm.
It's more that I want that so bad that it's going to create something negative in my life because I'm focusing so much on that. On that I want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I don't know, at least the immediately preceding ones, they're all like, don't do this action. This one's not, I don't know if that is your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. All the other ones that precede it are external action verbs that are done. This one is an internal verb that happens within the mind of an individual. And so then the obvious question, at least that I had as I was kind of digging into the study of this, is like, okay, well, if this is like a punishable, if it's setting up that this is a punishable offense, how in the world do you ascertain someone is coveting?
Well, I don't know, like,
Go ahead.
are you wanting an answer? Or is this like a?
Yeah,
guess
I
in
mean,
the
this is
passage
let's
looking
let's
in?
talk it through. Yeah.
I mean, you can't really, but I mean, just to throw it out there, it's at the end of the list. So with the covet, I mean, I can see how covetousness would lead to murder. I mean, it would could lead to committing adultery. It
Yeah.
could lead to stealing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know that coveting happened based upon an action that follows. And this gets at, I think, answering the question of why is it that we see chamad paired with action verbs virtually every time that it is used? It's because it is unknown to the people around that that is occurring without the action verb that then follows. Okay, so this is what leads to many to suggest, and I'm leaning on Jewish midrash here. I'm leaning on kind of historical interpretation here, that it must be read in light of Deuteronomy 7:25. So let's turn there real quick. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 25, which is a strict prohibition.
7:25.
7:25. Yep. The carved images of their gods you shall burn with fire. You shall not covet the silver or gold that is on them, or take it for yourselves, lest you be ensnared by it, for it is an abomination to the Lord your God. So a lot of Jewish midrash, which is just a fancy way of saying Jewish interpretation throughout history, has taken the 10th commandment to covet as not have been broken until the action itself takes place. Does that make sense, what I just said? So if you have a thought to steal something, you have not broken the 10th commandment until you've actioned that particular covet nature, that desire to steal. Does that make sense? So this is the way that a lot of Jewish midrash gets at this command. They try to interpret it this way, and it is crept into not only Jewish midrash, but all the way through. There are very few in the history of interpretation who would say that it does not carry some action with it and leave it with, no, what's being prohibited here is just the internalizing desire or coveting of that thing. I am going to actually strike against that a little bit. I don't think that that is what this commandment is saying. I think that prohibition is much what Jesus is doing in his Sermon on the Mount. He is re-emphasizing, if you will, that the 10th commandment can be broken alone, and then it leads to the breaking of others. So if you covet after something or someone else's wife or someone's male servant, female servant, donkey, anything that they own, you covet after that, you have broken the 10th commandment. Then if you steal it, you've broken 2 commandments. And you've broken the 10th and the 8th. Does that make sense? And
Yeah,
so
it's like David and that feller's wife.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, David and Bathsheba. Yeah, so he coveted her as he was looking at her on top of the roof bathing. At that moment, right after he looked at her and saw her as a woman that he would like to have in his harem of women, whatever, he has broken the 10th commandment. Then at the time in which he lay with her, he has now broken the 7th commandment. Then at the time that he desired that nobody know, he's broken the 10th commandment again. And then he sends her husband to the front lines and kills him, and he's broken the 6th commandment. So there's 4 times in which David is breaking literally 3 of the 10 commandments.
But you don't have to end up doing something bad like murder or something after, right? I mean, you can do like, I want my neighbor's boat, so I'm gonna cash out my 401k and borrow and test this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you can break the 10th commandment and not action on that which you coveted. And that's what I'm getting at. Because if we flatten it out, I think, to what some of these ancient Jewish rabbis would say, and then even some in the modern, if we flatten it out to mean that it is not officially broken until you action the coveting, then you're not really saying much with the 10th commandment. It's not wholly different from commandment 7, 8, or 6, or 9. Does that make sense? Any pushback on that? Any discussion? Any thoughts? So I think it's kind of a misreading of this command to say that it only violates the 10th commandment when you do it, when you action that which you coveted after. I don't think that they are what's called synonymous. So the coveting sin is not synonymous with the action that is sinful. I would say they're sequential, much like Joanna said. Yes.
So is it still sinful if it leads to positive
That we're going to get there.
action?
I promise. That's the next. You're rolling with me. I appreciate that. It's interesting also that there is no instance where hamad by itself means to do an action. So where hamad occurs by itself, without an action verb, it never infers that that action has been done, but they've broken to covet. Does that make sense? So what we've just talked through, namely that if you covet something, you have broken the 10th commandment, is actually played out in the rest of the Old Testament just by simple usage of the word. Yes, it does say hamad and then they did something tons of times. It is all over the Old Testament. I think the count is somewhere around 38 to 40 times that it is spoken of in that way. But when it occurs by itself, it doesn't necessarily infer that the thing that the action verb that follows or that would follow has been done. And so even the Old Testament is, I think, consistent with the way that this has been used. So I would define it. So our basic definition is up on the screen there. Do not desire what you do not have, right? So then I would refine that a little bit as a prohibition against desiring something that one does not have in the without action associated with it. I ran across this interesting quote. I just want to read it for us because I think it's really good. It kind of strikes at the heart of what's going on here. It's by a guy named Jackson, if anybody's interested in that. First, there is no evidence that liability for mere intention was ever applied in human court. So this is getting at the question that I had: how does one determine or ascertain whether or not someone has coveted, right, and then punish them for it? He said, second, the idea did exist that merely to intend a wrong was itself wrong. So we get a lot of understanding from Jesus on this. You hear the language thrown around, well, Jesus is upping the ante to the original commands when he goes in his Sermon on the Mount to say, you've heard it once said, but I say to you, right? But based upon what I see the 10th commandment saying is Jesus is just interpreting those other commands through the lens of the 10th. He's not necessarily saying something altogether new. What he's doing is he's bringing the focus to where they have forgotten it. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, well, if I just think it and don't action it. Remember, I didn't quote, Jewish Midrash thought that the action is what solidified the breaking of the prohibition of the 10th commandment. And so in that understanding, you can covet all day long, but if you didn't act on it, then you're not in sin. And so they would do this. And so I think what Jesus is doing there in the Sermon on the Mount is actually interpreting the entirety of the 10 commandments, or 1 through 9, through the lens of the 10th. And he's calling them out. I was about to say he's helping them understand, but he's really just showing forth their hypocrisy, because that entire sermon is built on you guys are saying one thing, but you're acting in a completely different way, right? It's all about hypocrisy if you read it start to finish. And so again, this seemingly unassuming 10th command really, I think, is the lens through which Jesus is now helping or interpreting all of the other 9. And I think we would do well to do the same. Any questions about that? And so the quote continues, that is to say that the last command is more about a sin rather than a crime. And so it's not there's no way to ascertain, it's not punishable by a human court, but it is certainly in the jurisprudence or in the justice system of God looked upon as a sin. So we can never flatten the 10th commandment to just mean whatever we want it to mean, or to take away the teeth of this 10th commandment in saying that God does not look upon that as sin, because he certainly does. But there's a further complication. There are instances where coveting is acceptable, getting to Joanna's point, right? There are positive cases of coveting. We would use that word. I know it sounds strange, but let's kind of go at this as much as we possibly can. Is coveting always negative? What would you guys say?
Well, can something be bad and it still have a good outcome?
Okay, talk through that a little bit.
But then you're just flattening it by using good and bad. But the real question is, can a sin lead to good things?
I would say that's even the secondary point. Can you do the action of coveting for good things where it not be sinful? I would say we do this even in our modern language. I did it just a little bit ago when I was talking about prayer requests. Am I in sin for coveting your prayers or desiring your prayers or seeking your prayers?
This is a good thing. It's usually tough.
You dig it now.
Yeah.
And this is the only reason I bring this up is because it's fun to think through all these things, because Jesus uses the Greek equivalent. He's probably speaking Aramaic, but using the Greek equivalent is in the words of Jesus' mouth when he says, "I am desirous of eating this supper with you with his disciples at the last Lord's Supper." Where in Luke 22, where he goes to that he sends them ahead of him to set up the Passover meal, and we read it every time we go through the Lord's Supper. You go forth, you'll find a house, ask the owner of the house, the master wants to prepare the meal here, and then he says, "Why do you want to do this?" He says, "Because I am desirous to eat this meal with you." That's the Greek equivalent of our Hebrew word there.
Yeah, earnestly desire to eat the Passover meal with you before I suffer.
Right.
Well, I was just about to say, I don't know. It seems like it's inherently wrong. That's why it's in this list. So.
So, like, I don't consider those two things the same.
Okay.
Like, because you we use the phrase like I covet your prayers, but really what you're saying is like, hey, can you pray for me? Not
Right.
like you have these prayers and I really want them, and if you don't give them to me, I'm like do something bad to get them from like.
Right, but it is assuming that you are going to pray, and I'm desirous of being included in the prayers that you are currently giving.
But
So
I
the
don't-
prayers that you are offering up, I want to be included in all that.
I mean, it's kind of like the whole good pride thing debate. Like, is there such thing as good pride?
Right. Paul uses it. Just a couple more positive references. Paul uses this Greek word in Philippians 1:23 when he says, in reference to being with Christ, right? I am desirous of returning or going to be with Christ, but it is for you that I stay.
I think he also says that about Rome too. A desire to go to Rome or something like that.
Yeah.
Or that's.
But are desire and covet the same word?
They're normally translated the same. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is there
Normally
are there
translated the same,
It is
or
the
are they
same.
word?
It is the same Hebrew / Greek.
correct?
It
Yes.
is, okay.
In Philippians 1:23.
Yeah.
And in Luke 22:23. I think that's
Yeah.
22:15.
Yeah.
And so it seems as though there are clearly negative oriented things that lead to action with a crime, right? And its use negatively is much more frequent in the New Testament as well as the Old, right? So its negative association is far outweighs what we would consider a positive association. But we still have this positive association that's connected with this word. You look like you had something to say.
I feel like most of it, it's going back to like the heart of it,
Yep.
of Paul desiring to be with the Lord is something that we all should have if we truly love the Lord and understand what he is and who he is.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like that's why it's written like this. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife or your neighbor, like
Yeah.
it's this is somebody else's. God has chosen to give it to them, and you just sitting there in discontent going, I want that. It's the heart of it is I am not happy because God gave that to them.
Right.
In other words, it doesn't just say you shall not covet, like I've seen
Right.
before. It attaches an object to it, right, as examples.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm loving this. This is
These
awesome.
are all physical things. So what about a skill? Because I would really like to farm
It
better.
says
Like
anything that is written. I don't know, is that anything an object or can it mean anything?
what about you think?
I would argue it means anything.
a skill. I wish I could farm better to give more away.
Right. And so this is getting at, I think, the refining of the definition that we had at the very start, right? Desire what you do not have. It needs to be refined a little bit more to be more specific as to what this prohibition is. And so what I think I'm hearing so far is that it's where the heart of it, it's not that you can't like something or desire something, it's that you desire or covet something that someone else has over and against what you have. Does that make sense? So for instance, like a man who longs to build a house or wants a house, right? That is not a negative sin. That's not a sin to desire your own home, right? To look at your neighbor's house and desire their house over and against what you have been gifted with is a breaking of the 10th commandment. So again, what I'm trying to lead us to do is kind of refine what we're thinking about what coveting actually is. It's not just as simple as, well, I don't have it, so I want it. It's at the heart level of leading us towards something that does not glorify the Lord in our actions. Does that make sense?
It kind of goes back to James chapter 1, like when he talks about, desire, like, I can just read it here. Each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then the desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think this gets at the sequential nature of what we see in the Old Testament, as you have the prohibition not to covet, leading to, if it is broken, an action of sin. Does that make sense? So again, I think it's really interesting as we kind of grapple with what this thing means. So kind of summing up our discussion here before we get into a little bit more application, a desire for something becomes coveting when its object is another person's possession or achievement. And that gets to your question of what if it's a skill or something that someone has trained for a really long time. Like I may really desire to be as awesome at martial arts as Jim is, and it's sinful for me to covet that skill without having or being willing to work to grow in that skill myself.
I don't know why you'd want to at this point.
So just a couple of quotes for you. Obviously, any desire can be emotionally and spiritually destructive. If it's obsessive, right? If it becomes obsessive. But the focus of this command is not any desire at all, but specifically on the desire for what actually belongs to another person, getting at what Joanna was just saying. Thus, for example, a man might lawfully long to have a home. This is where this kind of comes in. But if he desires a specific house belonging to another man, that is coveting. Does that make sense? A person only covets, a person who only covets has broken the Decalogue once. A person who covets and then steals has broken it twice. two significant aspects of coveting, therefore, are that the violation of the command takes place only inside one's head, leading to a actionable offense that can then be tried in, say, the court of law of Israel. And so the only way that we would know that coveting has been broken is either by an actionable offense or by an admission of a person. And so that's where we need to kind of depend upon the justice of God to recognize, obviously, that sin has occurred, and then convict them for that sin of coveting, because it is the first and the beginning point of, or the birth of, sinfulness in man, as James is pointing out, that it grows and gives birth to that which is not only not glorifying to God, but completely counter to what we as Christians and Christ followers are called to do in this world. And so coveting is, as many have put it, or many have stated, is kind of the base sin that gives rise to everything else. Now, others have laid this assertion down at the feet of pride, right? Pride is the kernel sin, if you will, from which everything else sprouts, to say it more flowerily. But yeah, I think there's something to this idea of coveting being the lens through which we see how sinfulness spreads, or sinfulness is affected in the world. Does that make sense? Any questions about that before we move on to? I kind of already touched on the danger. So I want to take a look at a really interesting passage in Romans, as kind of not a test case for this, but to look at what Paul says in a roundabout way. I believe it's in reference to coveting. He actually quotes the command itself in Romans chapter 7. My goodness, can't get there. There we go. So if someone could read for me Romans 7 through 12.
What then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin, for I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good.
Okay, so he goes on to say in 19 to really the end of the chapter, this warring that happens in between, or within the heart of man. But I wanted to read this particular section because not only he quotes coveting, but he says that he would not have known if the law did not tell him what it is. And I think this is what Jesus is intending to do again with the Sermon on the Mount, is help or call out or challenge the leadership to understand that this covetous nature gives rise or births the sinfulness of humanity. And so there's a lot of other theological things that we could say about this particular passage, but I wanted to just read that in Paul's own language to help us kind of understand or get at this idea that covetousness is not something that we should trifle with. It's not something that we should just kind of be like, oh, well, it's kind of okay, or rebrand it or justify it as, well, I mean, I'm just recognizing beauty in something else or whatever. It's something dangerous that we as Christians should be on guard against. And that's again exactly what Paul would go on to say in 19 to the end of the chapter, is that because of this nature that we have to covet or to sin, it creates a war within us that we must always be vigilant on guard for. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Any thoughts? So there's a couple of misnomers that I think that this command helps us understand within the aspect of the Torah, right? Because the Torah, I don't know if you guys have ever heard this, but it's always been taught to me. The Old Testament is concerned about you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't do this, right? It's particularly about what actions you don't do. And it's not until Jesus that you get this idea of the heart. What I think this command strikes vehemently against is that notion. I think there has always been this concern with followers of God honoring the Lord in the heart first and then in their actions. And you get this language in Deuteronomy with circumcise therefore the foreskins of your heart, right? Obey me in these things that you have been commanded to do. It begins in the heart, not only destruction through sin, but also life and obedience. And so I think there's something to that that strikes against this misnomer. I think. Has anybody else heard that characterization that the Old Testament is kind of like a bunch of do nots, that God was just like, bam, bam, don't do that. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't have fun, don't have a party. But rather, he doesn't say that. Anyway, but I've always heard that and it's bothered me. And I think this is why, because the 10th commandment literally does exactly what we claim that Jesus has been doing in the Sermon on the Mount. And I think if we read backwards from the 10th commandment all the way through 9 through 1, I think we get a new, beautiful understanding of how pervasive the 10 commandments are. And what it really protects is covenantal continuity and covenantal, not only community between humans, but covenant community between us and the Lord. And it is safeguarded by this 10th commandment that begins in the heart. The second thing I think that it kind of teaches is that evil in the heart is a precursor to external evil actions. Precursor to evil actions outside. It doesn't just, we don't just trip into the breaking of the 10th commandment.
Whoops.
Like, whoops, Potiphar's wife didn't trip into Joseph. You get what I'm saying? Like, she sought him, sought after him. David didn't trip into bed with Bathsheba, or he didn't, accidentally murder Uriah. There are no accidental sins, right? It's birthed within the heart and then gives rise to sinfulness. And so this idea that our culture has is that, and I'll be honest, like Abigail has started doing this.
Well, sorry,
Sorry,
I was
go
going to
for it.
say, you said there are no accidental sins, but I mean, doesn't the law say there are some unintentional sins?
There are unintended consequences of like negligence, which they would then call sinfulness.
Okay.
And I think that is more of a judicial language.
Okay.
So like these are things that you can be tried for. Manslaughter through the negligence of your bull or whatever. I think I would be comfortable with saying that, but like accidental breaking of the law, I don't know is a thing. I think those occurrences are more for judicial reasons.
Okay. All right.
So, Pastor,
Yeah.
would I be correct in summarizing what you just said as sin is a choice?
Correct. That would be a good summary of what I just said. And so again, like back to my example with Abigail, right? I will, she'll, talk back to me, right? And I'll say, Abigail, you cannot do that. That is against the rules. You do not argue with Daddy. Daddy gave you a command to do, and you do it, right? And then as soon as I launch into this is your punishment, her immediate response is, but I didn't mean to, right? And so that's her immediate response to me at, getting called out for something that she's done wrong. Have you guys experienced this? Anyway, so okay, good. I don't feel like a cruddy parent. Anyway, so not myself in that. But yeah, so like we had this innate desire within us to justify our behavior, and we normally go to this idea of it was an accident. I promise I didn't mean what I just did, but I chose to do it nonetheless. And so I should be held accountable for that which I chose to do. Just like Abigail should be held accountable and not watching television the next day when she chooses to talk back to me. She loses those privileges because they are privileges and not rights. Anyway, but and so yeah, I think that we have this innate desire to do this, that we justify ourselves, and I think this commandment strikes against the heart of that. No, it was not an accident that you lusted after that man's wife. It was a choice that you made. There's a point in your mind where you went there and you did not have to. And so again, I think this evil in the heart is a precursor to evil in actions. Is a direct, hit against that misnomer that we can accidentally offend God. Right? We choose to reject Him. We choose to reject His command. We choose disobedience. And we as Christians should be very vigilant in our guard over our mind and heart for that reason, because it can lead to these ideas of not obeying what the Lord has commanded us. So now that's the danger portion, right? Danger, Will Robinson. That is not a good direction to go. Go down that path leads to aliens. Don't do that. Right, this idea must kind of guide our vigilance in guarding our hearts. So I promise a remedy, right? So what is the remedy to covetousness? What would you say is the remedy?
Jesus.
Jesus, the answer to everything. What would you say biblically is not that Jesus is not the answer, but that started off really bad. What would we say biblically is the contrast to covetousness or the remedy to it?
Jesus.
Come on, Buck. Yeah, goodness gracious.
Thanks, Buck. I gave my answer, guys.
We used to call that a church answer.
That's right.
Prayer.
Absolutely.
Prayer? Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe, I don't know, just to actually give a real answer. Not that Jesus is not a real answer, but
You can never back off of that. Like, you can't go somewhere else.
yeah. Well, no, I don't know. Maybe changing the object of your covetousness to the Lord instead. I don't know, just making it like a little bit more of an illustration of what Buck said with prayer.
Yeah.
Instead of like to desiring those things, desire God instead. I know that kind of sounded better in my head than saying it out loud.
Because even if it's not bad, it still takes your mind off of Him,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So you've done switch from like if you were, 70% thinking about Him, 30% thinking about working other stuff. Now that thing is reducing what you're thinking about, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I'm gonna go back to Joanna's mom's.
You don't pitch a fit.
Yeah, you get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. What is the underlying attitude of that statement? Contentedness. Yeah, contentment, right? I saw a brilliant, I tried to find it, I couldn't find it. But I saw a brilliant little cartoon, like a newspaper cartoon. It was many years ago, and it had two donkeys, and it was a fence line in the center, and both had equally lush pastures of grass, right? And for whatever reason, they're talking over a meal, namely the grass, but they're eating from each other's side of the fence. And it read one word underneath it: discontent, because they wanted what the other person was having. And so I think that there's something true to that in us, that when we desire something that we don't have, we are not being content with what the Lord has given us. And so I think that that's the remedy to covetousness, is contentment. And I think Paul would agree with us, right? If we look at Philippians, let's look at Philippians and we'll be done for tonight. Because I love this passage. A, because it has one of the most misquoted verses in all of the Bible in it. And B, because it's just an awesome passage.
Did you hear Dr. Merkel's lecture
did.
thing on it? It was great.
It was
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, it was fantastic. Because we anyway, I'm not gonna get into all of that, but so would somebody read for us Philippians 4:11 through 12, or 11 through 13? Sorry.
Never even understood.
Is it for 11 through 13?
Yeah.
Not that I speak in respect of one, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to be abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me.
Okay, so possibly the best remedy to covetousness is contentment. Did you have a
Can I push back on that a little?
sure? Go for it.
I think it's also like, yes, contentment,
Mhm.
but I think we sometimes miss out an opportunity by being content because we're just sitting there being content in all things. It's not that you shouldn't be,
Mhm.
but I think also it's important that when we find ourselves coveting,
Mhm.
to look at what we're actually desiring.
Mhm.
Because that's one way, like, I've learned to redirect my covetousness into something that is glorifying to the Lord, of like, for example, like seeing people with more money than me, being like, why am I desiring more money?
Mhm.
And being like, well, I desire to take care of my family better. And it's
Mhm.
like, okay, so then I just need to redirect that into a prayer for God, help me to learn how to take better care of my family, like provide for me and my family. Like, and so like looking at like the actual, like, what are you desiring? Because often it's not the object that you're looking at in that moment. There's like a deeper desire that you need to like search your own heart for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't disagree with that. And I don't know if that takes away from what Paul obviously is saying here,
Right,
contentment, right? And learning, because the natural question with that is, okay, what happens if he doesn't give you that?
Mhm.
It's get what you get, you don't fit your fit, right? That type of understanding. And so this idea of contentment with, I would, maybe we should, I guess, guard that with saying contentment in resources, contentment in
Right.
situation.
We can't change.
Right.
Pastor Adam,
Yes.
perhaps a better word would be grateful.
Grateful. Yeah, I think grateful captures that. Be grateful for that which God has given us. And all of these are great words. I think contentment captures a little bit of all of them. And because if you are content with what you have, you will praise the Lord for that which He has given you, namely grateful.
I think that contentment is a passive word, where grateful or gratitude is a action word, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's wrong. Again, I think, like I said, all that we're touching on here, I think, is related to this idea that Paul is pushing at in this rejoicing in what God has, whatever situation it may be, where God has placed us. And that's why Philippians 4:13 needs to be there, because there are times where that place is going to be a hard one. It's going to be very difficult, but yet God has called us to be there, and He has ordained us to be there for a particular reason, and to find joy in Him as the ultimate source of it is what I think Paul is driving at here, and I think it strikes against. It leads us away from covetousness if we practice what Paul is instructing here. And so that's the only reason why I'm saying I'm trying to boil it down to kind of a remedy answer to, well, okay, this is what we're prohibiting, namely covetousness. Then what do we do instead? Because the inclination, as we talked of, our heart is toward covetousness. So how do we allow the Spirit of God to work in our lives in such a way that it changes that very affection that we have to be discontent? Because we have that, right? So again, a contented spirit is the direct opposite of a covetous one. If one finds contentment in what the Lord has done, then covetousness would not necessarily be the desire of our heart or the inclination of our heart. So again, and another one just to add to it would be humility, right? Humility and contentment are two of the most undervalued character traits in our culture currently. The materialism of the Western world has crept into and corroded pretty much everything that it touches. And it has led to this understanding of the world that I'm never happy unless I'm wanting something else. I'm always happiest when I'm desiring something I don't have.
I guess you could though ask though, like, well, how do I just be content? Right.
Mhm.
I don't know. I kind of say that.
Jesus.
Jesus, I'm going to answer that question with Jesus.
So like, I don't know, like going on prayer, something that wasn't said that I was kind of surprised is fasting hasn't been mentioned. You know, I'm not saying it's going to sound weird for a second, but Thomas More, he was a Catholic counter-reformer. So he was a Catholic person during the Reformation era. I think he was contemporary roughly with Martin Luther. But he literally like beat himself, like trying to obtain like contentment and everything. I only know about this guy because Andrew, my friend Andrew, he wrote a paper on him or whatever. And we were talking about it one day. But he literally like beat himself because he did not like he wasn't like because he was such a sinner in his mind that he wanted to focus on God more, that he would beat himself, like actually cause himself self-harm. And now I'm not advocating for that at all, but I think that's something that's like very interesting that like we would never even think about doing. Like we would never even think about going that far. And we don't even usually think about going as far as fasting for a day.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Fasting is one of those disciplines. I do believe it is a Christian discipline that we are called to.
Yeah.
He just doesn't. Every time Jesus talks about fasting, he doesn't say if you do it, he says when you do it. It's an expectation of the Christian faith that fasting be a part of our lives. Because what it does is it supplants the desire for that which we are engaged in with the desire for God's presence to be that nourishment that we need. So it just strikes right at the heart of it. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and that was all to say, like, I think like doing something like that is actually like a really applicable thing that like leads to contentment. I know one professor said like if he ever fasted, he had to have fast for like at least 4 days because he just coveted food
Right.
For that long, and it took him that long to get over the desire to like want to eat something to focus actually on the Lord. But I just thought that was a real, I don't know, applicable way to
Totally is.
to lead to contentment.
Yeah, absolutely. So much like Joanna's mother's wonderful statement, right? You get what you get, you don't get what you fit. There's a couple of statements that I want to end our time together with. First is a Jewish proverb, and it says, "Who is rich? He who delights in his share." I think that's a brilliant way to put it. It's very, very similar to what Joanna's mom used to say. And then also 2 quotes from.
I think that goes a little deeper.
Okay, maybe a little bit, but
I just now picture your mom like dancing around the house when you all were younger, like and everything, and like singing like Dr. Seuss rhymes and everything.
The other 2 come from Augustine. Augustine, look him up if you don't know who he is. He's challenging believers in this moment with their relationship with God. And he just states this plainly: what haven't you acquired if you've got hold of God? So don't covet your neighbor's property because it undervalues the thing that is most precious. And so it's just, I just, that sense of contentment in God's presence in our lives, I think again, is this direct contrast to what this prohibition in the 10 Commandments finds itself. And if coveting is so dangerous that it opens the door to all the other 9 sins of the 10 Commandments and so many more, then we should be vigilant as Christians, be on guard against this covetous nature. And I think the remedy of that is this contented spirit in God's presence among us, not only in our church, in our individual lives, in our marriages, in our parenting, all of those things. We can be content in God's presence as he guides us and leads us through them. And so just encourage us that because the 10th commandment is so dangerous, we have to have a counter to it. And I think this is one of those things. There are many ways to get there, as Jim pointed out, just one, right? Fasting. Buck pointed out another, prayer, right? There are tons of disciplines which are vital to the Christian life that we often do not think through. Donald Whitney wrote an entire book. Is it Whitney? Whitney. Yeah, Whitney. Donald Whitney wrote an entire book called The Christian Disciplines that I would highly encourage. I have on my shelf if you ever want to borrow it, where he goes through a number of these. And again, so I think as we learn to be content in God's presence, we will find ourselves being less and less covetous. And that will lead, I believe, to less and less sinfulness in our lives because we are not giving it a kernel from which to sprout. So thank you guys for going along the journey with me to looking at this particular command. That concludes the 10, which is cool. It only took us 2 months to get through, so that's awesome. I'm glad you guys came along for the ride. We're going to continue in Exodus. Obviously, from this point, seeing the reaction of the Israelites next time. And so I look forward to diving into the book of the covenant after that. So any final questions or thoughts before we close? Would somebody be willing to close this?
Close us.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
And Father, thank you for this Bible study, Lord, and how great it is just to explore your word and dig into it, and just how we've been doing it with these 10 words, Lord. And this last one, Father, help us to set our mind on you, help us to desire you and not the external things of this world in such a way that we are harming the spirit within us, Lord, but let the Holy Spirit enliven us and give us contentment in all things. In you, Father, and in your Son. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you guys so much. Good to see you, Buck. Thanks for joining us.
I pray that God's face would shine upon you and his countenance be with you. And until next time, remember, God loves you, and so do I.